Clara May Hollister dropped to her knees in the dirt and pressed her ear against her 2-year-old's chest. Nothing. No breath. No heartbeat she could find. Her hands shook as she tilted Tommy's head back, breathed into his tiny mouth, and waited. 1 second. 2. Then a cough, weak, rattling, but alive. She clutched him against her chest and sobbed. Behind her, 8-year-old Eli held his sister's hand, both children too exhausted to cry. 3 weeks running, 3 weeks starving, and now, standing at the gate of a stranger's ranch, Clara faced an impossible choice: marry a man she'd never met, or watch her children die. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this opening grabbed your heart, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything. The summer of 1878 had already killed 2 of Clara's chickens, dried up her well, and now it was trying to take her son. Tommy hadn't moved in 3 hours. His body hung limp in her arms, light as a bundle of rags, his skin burning so hot she could feel it through her dress. Every few minutes, his breath would catch, stop, and Clara's heart would seize until that terrible rattling started again. "Mama!" Eli's voice came from behind her, steady but thin. "Mama, Rosie can't walk no more." Clara turned. Her 8-year-old stood in the middle of the road, holding his 5-year-old sister's hand. Rosie's legs had given out. She sat in the dust, her face red and streaked with dried tears, too dehydrated to cry anymore. "I'll carry her," Eli said. "No," Clara's voice cracked. "You can barely carry yourself." "Then what do we do?" Clara looked at the fence line stretching ahead of them, at the building shimmering in the distance. A ranch, a real one, with a house and a barn and smoke rising from somewhere. People lived there. People with water and food and maybe, God willing, medicine. "We keep moving," she said. "Just a little farther." She shifted Tommy's weight and reached down to pull Rosie up with her free arm. The girl whimpered, but didn't fight. She was too tired to fight. They walked. Clara's boots had worn through 3 days ago. Every step ground dirt and stones into the raw skin of her feet. She'd wrapped them in strips torn from her petticoat, but the fabric had shredded long since. Now she just walked on blood and stubbornness. "Mama," Rosie whispered against her shoulder, "is Papa watching us from heaven?" Clara's throat tightened. "Yes, baby, he's watching." "Is he mad we left the farm?" "No." Clara pressed a kiss to her daughter's sweat-damp hair. "He understands. Papa always understood." Daniel. Her Daniel. Dead 18 months now. Thrown from a horse during a cattle drive. They'd brought his body home across a saddle, and Clara had buried him on the hill behind their farmhouse, the place where they planned to build a proper home someday. She'd stood at that grave with Eli's hand in hers and Tommy in her belly, and she'd promised herself she would survive. For her children. For Daniel's memory. She hadn't counted on Vernon. The thought of her brother-in-law sent ice through her veins, despite the brutal heat. Vernon Hollister, Daniel's older brother, with his cold eyes and thin smile, and the way he'd started coming around after the funeral. At first, she'd thought he was being kind. Family, looking after family. Then she'd seen the papers. Petition for guardianship. 3 children. Mother declared unfit due to inability to provide adequate care. All assets, including land and water rights, to be managed by appointed guardian until children reach majority. He wanted her children. He wanted Daniel's land, and he had lawyers and money and connections to judges who owed him favors. Clara had no lawyers, no money, no connections. She had her children and a 3-week head start. Mama! Eli's voice again, sharper now. Someone's coming! Clara's head snapped up. A rider approached from the direction of the ranch, moving fast, dust kicking up behind him. Her heart hammered. Vernon's men? Had they finally caught up? "Get behind me," she said, pushing Rosie toward her brother. "Both of you, stay close." The rider slowed as he approached, and Clara got her first clear look at him. Tall, even on horseback, dark hair going gray at the temples. A face like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains, all hard angles and sharp edges. But it was the scar that caught her attention. A long, pale line running from his left cheekbone to his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. He stopped his horse a few yards away and looked down at them. Clara straightened her spine despite the weight of 2 children. She'd beg if she had to, but she wouldn't cower. "Please," her voice came out raw, barely more than a whisper. "My son, he's burning up. He needs water. Medicine. Please." The man's eyes moved from her face to the children. Eli standing rigid and protective. Rosie clinging to her brother. Tommy motionless in Clara's arms. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly. Something darker. Something that recognized suffering. He dismounted in one smooth motion and crossed the distance between them. Without a word, he took Tommy from Clara's arms, his movements careful but certain. He pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck, then his forehead, then leaned close to listen to his breathing. "How long has he been like this?" "Since yesterday morning. The fever started 3 days ago, but—" 3 days? The man's jaw tightened. "What have you been giving him?" "Creek water. It's all we had." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or something close to it. "Creek water's what made him sick in the first place." "I know," Clara's voice broke. "I know. But there was nothing else. We've been walking for 3 weeks and—" 3 weeks. He looked at her, really looked, and Clara felt the weight of his assessment. Her torn dress, her bleeding feet, her hollowed cheeks, the desperate grip of the 2 children behind her. "You've been running." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "From what?" Clara hesitated. The truth was dangerous, but lies wouldn't save her children. "My brother-in-law. He wants my children. Wants to take them from me and control their inheritance." "And you ran instead of fighting." "I fought." The words came out harder than she intended. "I went to court. I won. But he wouldn't accept it. He hired men to take them. I overheard them planning it. So yes, I ran. What would you have done?" The man studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and started walking toward the ranch, Tommy still cradled against his chest. "Come on, all of you, before the heat takes another one." Clara grabbed Rosie's hand and hurried after him, Eli on her heels. Her legs trembled with every step, but she forced them to move. The ranch buildings grew larger as they approached. A well-maintained house with a wide porch, a solid barn, corrals with horses moving in the shade. "Ruth!" the man called as they reached the yard. "Ruth, get out here!" A woman appeared on the porch, mid-50s, sturdy, with kind eyes that sharpened when she saw the children. "Lord have mercy! Josiah, what—" "Get water boiling, clean cloths, the medicine box from my office." The man, Josiah, climbed the porch steps and disappeared inside. Ruth followed, but not before shooting Clara a look that mixed concern with curiosity. Clara stood in the yard, swaying on her ruined feet, her arms suddenly empty without Tommy's weight. "Mama?" Rosie tugged her hand. "Is the man going to help Tommy?" "I think so, baby." "Is he nice?" Clara didn't know how to answer that. The man hadn't been nice. He'd been efficient. There was a difference. "Come on," she said, leading them up the porch steps. "Let's go inside." The house was blessedly cool after the brutal heat outside. Clara's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, and she found herself in a main room that spoke of order and prosperity. Solid furniture, clean floors, books on shelves. But there was something empty about it too. Something missing. No photographs on the walls. No flowers in vases. No small touches that said someone had made this place a home. Josiah had laid Tommy on a long sofa and was working over him with the same focused intensity he'd shown outside. Ruth appeared with a basin of water and clean cloths, and the two of them moved together like people who'd done this before. "Sit down before you fall down." Clara blinked. Josiah hadn't looked up from Tommy, but he was talking to her. "I'm fine. You've got blood coming through what's left of your shoes. You're shaking like a newborn calf, and you look like you haven't eaten in a week. Sit. Down." His voice left no room for argument. Clara sank into the nearest chair, pulling Rosie onto her lap. Eli stood beside them, his small body still tense, still ready to run. "Ruth," Josiah's voice was clipped. "Get these children fed, and see about the woman's feet." "I've got a name," Clara said. "Clara Hollister." Josiah glanced at her. "Josiah Callahan. This is my ranch. Now let Ruth look at your feet before infection sets in and I have to cut them off." Rosie gasped. Clara pulled her closer. "He's joking, baby." "I ain't joking." But something that might have been dark humor flickered in Josiah's eyes. "I've done it before. Rather not do it again." Ruth appeared beside Clara with a bowl of broth and a chunk of bread. "Here, sweetheart," she said to Rosie. "You eat this while I help your mama." "I can take care of myself," Clara said. Ruth's expression gentled. "I'm sure you can. You've been taking care of yourself and these 3 little ones for a long time, haven't you? But you're in my house now, and in my house, we let people help us when we need it." Clara's eyes burned. She looked away, blinking hard, and let Ruth kneel at her feet to unwrap the bloody rags. The silence stretched, broken only by Ruth's soft sounds of dismay at Clara's feet and Tommy's labored breathing. Then Eli's voice, sharp and suspicious. "Why are you helping us?" Clara's head snapped up. Eli stood facing Josiah, his small hands balled into fists, his jaw set in a way that looked too much like Daniel. Josiah straightened from Tommy and met the boy's eyes without flinching. "What's your name, son?" "Eli, and I ain't your son." "Fair enough." Josiah crossed his arms. "You want to know why I'm helping? Because your brother's going to die without clean water and medicine, and I've got both. That reason enough for you?" Eli's jaw tightened. "People don't help for free. What do you want?" "Eli," Clara's voice was soft but firm. "That's enough." "It's a fair question." Josiah looked at the boy with something like respect. "You're the man of the family now, aren't you? Looking out for your mother and your siblings." Eli didn't answer, but something in his posture shifted. "I don't know what I want yet," Josiah said honestly. "Right now, I want to keep your brother alive. After that, we'll figure out the rest." He turned back to Tommy, and Clara watched his hands, large, calloused, careful, as he pressed cool cloths to her son's burning skin and coaxed water between his cracked lips. An hour passed. 2. Tommy's fever didn't break, but it stabilized. His breathing evened out. The terrible rattling faded to something softer, steadier. Ruth fed all of them, broth and bread and cold water that tasted like heaven after weeks of drinking from dirty creeks. She bandaged Clara's feet with gentle efficiency and clucked over Rosie's blistered hands and Eli's sunburned shoulders. "You walked 3 weeks?" Ruth shook her head. "Lord, woman, how are you still standing?" "I stopped standing about 2 miles back," Clara admitted. I've been running on spite ever since." Ruth laughed, a warm, real sound that made something loosen in Clara's chest. "Spite's gotten me through some hard times too. Ain't nothing wrong with it." Evening fell. Ruth lit lamps and made up beds in a room upstairs for the children. Rosie was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Eli fought it longer, his eyes tracking to Clara every few minutes, making sure she was still there. "Go to sleep," Clara told him softly. "I'll be here when you wake up." "Promise?" "I promise." He slept. Clara stayed at his bedside for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the way his face finally relaxed into something close to peace. He was 8 years old, and trying so hard to be a man, it broke her heart. She found Josiah on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring out at the darkening prairie. "Tommy?" she asked. "Sleeping. Fever's down a little. We'll know more by morning." Clara leaned against the porch rail, her legs still unsteady. "Thank you. For everything." Josiah didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "Your brother-in-law. What's his name?" "Vernon. Vernon Hollister." "He got money?" "Some. Enough to hire lawyers and men to do his dirty work." "And he wants the children because—" "Water rights." Clara's voice hardened. "My husband's land has the best water access in 3 counties. Vernon's ranch is upstream, but it's been dry for years. If he controls our land, he controls the water." "So it ain't about the children at all?" "No, they're just—" Clara's voice caught. "They're just the way to get what he really wants." Josiah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How far behind you is he?" "I don't know. We stayed off the main roads, avoided towns. But he's got money and men, and I've got—" She gestured at herself, at her ruined dress and bandaged feet. "I've got nothing." "You've got 3 children who are still alive after 3 weeks of running." Clara looked at him, surprised by the statement. "That ain't nothing," Josiah said. "That's everything." She didn't know how to respond to that. The silence stretched between them, comfortable in a strange way. "What happened to your wife?" Clara asked. The words were out before she could stop them. "I'm sorry. That's none of my business." "She died." Josiah's voice didn't change. 8 years ago. Childbirth. Baby died too. A boy." "I'm sorry." "So was I." He took a long drink of coffee. "This house has been empty ever since. I built it for a family I was supposed to have. Never got around to filling it." Clara thought about the empty walls, the missing photographs, the strange hollowness she'd felt when she first walked in. "Do you have other family?" she asked. "No, my parents are dead. No siblings. When I die, this ranch goes to lawyers and creditors unless I do something about it." There was something in his voice, something deliberate. Clara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What are you saying, Mr. Callahan?" Josiah turned to face her. In the lamplight from the window, his scar stood out stark and white against his tanned skin. "I'm saying you need protection. Legal protection. The kind that means your brother-in-law can't just show up with a piece of paper and take your children." Clara's heart was pounding now. "And?" "And I need an heir. Someone to leave this ranch to when I'm gone. Someone to carry on what I've built." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's mouth went dry. "You can't mean—" "Marry me." Josiah's voice was steady, matter of fact, like he was discussing the price of cattle. "Tonight, if we can find a preacher. Tomorrow at the latest. Your children become mine by law. Your brother-in-law has no claim. The inheritance stays protected until they're old enough to manage it themselves." Clara stared at him. The world tilted. "You don't know me," she said. You don't know anything about me. I know you walked 3 weeks through hell to save your children. I know you stood up to me when most people wouldn't. I know your son calls you Mama, even when he's so sick he don't know where he is. Josiah's eyes held hers. That tells me everything I need to know. But marriage, you're asking me to... I'm asking you to make a choice. His voice softened, just barely. You can keep running. I'll give you provisions, point you toward the next town. But your brother-in-law will catch you eventually. You know that. And when he does, you won't have any legal ground to stand on. Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. Or, Josiah continued, you can marry me. Tonight. And tomorrow, when Vernon Hollister shows up with his lawyers and his papers, I'll be standing beside you. And he'll have to go through me to get to those children. Clara thought about Eli, asleep upstairs, trying so hard to protect the family. She thought about Rosie, asking if Papa was watching from heaven. She thought about Tommy, so small and still, fighting to breathe. She thought about Vernon's cold eyes and thin smile. What do you get out of this? She asked. Really, what do you actually want? Josiah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I want to stop being alone in a house built for 5. I want someone to leave this land to when I'm gone. I want... He stopped, jaw tightening. I want a family, even if it ain't the one I planned. Clara looked at him, this stranger with his scarred face and empty house and matter-of-fact proposal. He wasn't offering her love. He wasn't offering her romance. He was offering her a deal, plain and simple. But he was also offering her children a chance to live. If I say no? Then you rest here tonight, and I send you on your way in the morning. No harm done. And if I say yes? Josiah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then we ride into town at first light, find a preacher, and make it legal before your brother-in-law can stop us. Clara's heart was racing. Her palms were slick with sweat. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to take her children and disappear into the night, to keep moving until they found somewhere safe. But there was no safe place. Not anymore. Vernon would find them eventually. He had too much money. Too many connections, too much to game. This was the only way. Clara took a deep breath and looked Josiah Callahan in the eye. Yes, she said. I'll marry you. Josiah nodded once. Then get some sleep, Mrs. Hollister. Tomorrow, you become Mrs. Callahan. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving Clara alone on the porch with the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. She'd just agreed to marry a stranger. She'd just traded her freedom for her children's safety. And somewhere out there, Vernon Hollister was getting closer. Clara wrapped her arms around herself and stared into the darkness, trying to find the courage to believe she'd made the right choice. Upstairs, Tommy coughed in his sleep. Clara closed her eyes and prayed. Clara didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed Ruth had made up for her, staring at the ceiling, listening to Rosie's soft breathing beside her and Tommy's labored gasps from the cot across the room. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vernon's face. Every time she started to drift, she jerked awake, heart pounding, certain she'd heard hoofbeats outside. Dawn came slow and gray. Clara was already dressed when Ruth knocked softly on the door. Tommy's fever broke about an hour ago, Ruth said. He's asking for water. Clara's knees nearly buckled. He's awake? Awake and cranky. Good sign if you ask me. Clara rushed past her and down the stairs. Tommy sat propped up on the sofa, his small face pale but his eyes open and focused. When he saw her, He reached out with both arms. "Mama!" She gathered him against her chest and held on so tight she was afraid she might hurt him. But she couldn't let go. Couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "Hey, you scared me so bad." "I'm thirsty." Clara laughed, a wet, broken sound. "I know. We're going to get you all the water you want." "Mrs. Hollister," Josiah's voice came from the doorway. Clara looked up, suddenly aware of how she must look, tear-streaked, disheveled, still wearing yesterday's ruined dress. "We need to leave within the hour," he said. "If you want this done before anyone comes looking." Clara's stomach dropped. For a moment, in the relief of Tommy's recovery, she'd almost forgotten. She was getting married today. "I'll be ready," she said. Josiah nodded and disappeared. Clara heard his boots on the porch, his voice calling orders to the ranch hands outside. She looked down at Tommy, at his fever-bright eyes and cracked lips, and felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a stone. "Mama?" Rosie's voice came from the stairs. "What's happening?" Clara turned. Both of her older children stood there, Rosie rubbing sleep from her eyes, Eli rigid and watchful. "Come here," Clara said. "Both of you. I need to tell you something." They gathered around her, and Clara searched for the right words. There weren't any, so she said it plain. "I'm getting married today. To Mr. Callahan." Rosie's eyes went wide. "The man with the horses?" "Yes. Is he going to be our new papa?" Clara's throat tightened. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. If you want him to be." "I don't want a new papa." Eli's voice was hard, cold. "We already have a papa." "Eli, Papa's dead, and you're just going to replace him? With some stranger?" "I'm not replacing anyone." Clara reached for him, but he stepped back. "Eli, listen to me. Your Uncle Vernon is coming. You know what he wants. You know what he'll do if he gets you." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. "Mr. Callahan can protect us," Clara continued. "If I marry him, Vernon can't take you. The law won't let him." "So you're marrying him for us?" "Yes." Eli stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not acceptance, but resignation. "Fine, but he ain't my papa." He turned and walked away, his small shoulders rigid with anger. Clara watched him go and felt something crack inside her chest. "Mama?" Rosie tugged her sleeve. "Is Eli mad?" "Yes, baby, but he'll be okay." "I think Mr. Callahan is nice," Rosie said. "He has a scar like a pirate. Can I touch it?" "No, absolutely not." "But—" "Rosie, no." Ruth appeared with fresh clothes, a simple blue dress that was too big but clean, and a pair of boots that almost fit. "These belonged to my daughter before she moved to California. She won't miss them." Clara changed quickly, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. When she looked in the small mirror above the wash basin, a stranger stared back. Thin, hollow-eyed, exhausted. Not exactly a blushing bride. "You look fine," Ruth said, reading her expression. "Josiah ain't marrying you for your looks anyway." "That's comforting." Ruth laughed. "It should be. Means he's marrying you for something that matters more." The wagon was already hitched when Clara came outside. Josiah sat on the bench, reins in hand, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Two of his ranch hands flanked them on horseback. Protection, Clara realized, in case Vernon's men found them on the road. "The children?" Josiah asked. "Ruth's watching Tommy. Rosie and Eli are coming with us." Josiah's eyebrow rose slightly. "You sure about that?" "They need to see it happen. They need to know it's real." He nodded and helped her up onto the bench. Rosie scrambled up after her, but Eli hung back, his arms crossed over his chest. Eli. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. Get in the wagon. I can walk. It's 90 minutes to town. You can't walk that far. I walked 3 weeks. I can walk 90 minutes. Eli? Let him ride with me. Clara turned. One of the ranch hands, a young man with an easy smile, had brought his horse alongside the wagon. Name's Tom, he said, tipping his hat. I don't mind the company. Eli looked at the horse, then at his mother. Clara saw the war in his eyes, pride versus practicality. Finally, he nodded and let Tom pull him up into the saddle. Josiah clicked his tongue, and the wagon lurched forward. The ride to town was long and hot. Rosie chatted for the first 30 minutes, questions about the horses, the ranch, whether Mr. Callahan had any dogs, whether she could learn to ride, whether the pirate scar hurt when he smiled. Josiah answered each one with patient brevity. Did it hurt when you got the scar? Yes. Did you cry? No. Why not? Crying don't fix nothing. Rosie considered this. I cry sometimes, when I'm sad. That's different. Sad crying's all right. Do you ever cry sad? Josiah was quiet for a long moment. Used to. Not anymore? Ran out of tears, I reckon. Rosie reached over and patted his arm with her small hand. That's okay. Mama says tears come back when you need them. Something flickered across Josiah's face. Surprise, maybe. Or something softer. He didn't pull away from Rosie's touch. Clara watched the exchange and felt something shift in her chest. This hard, scarred man who proposed marriage like a business deal. He'd just let a 5-year-old comfort him without flinching. Maybe this could work. Maybe. The town appeared on the horizon around midday. Clara's stomach knotted as they drew closer. This was it. No turning back. Preacher's name is Reverend Mills, Josiah said. He'll want to talk to you alone before the ceremony. Make sure you ain't being forced. What do I tell him? The truth, that you're choosing this. Am I? Josiah looked at her. Are you? Clara thought about Vernon, about her children, about the 3 weeks of hell that had led her here. Yes, I'm choosing this. Then tell him that. They stopped in front of a small white church. Josiah helped Clara down, and she stood on the dusty street, heart pounding, as he tied off the horses. Mama? Rosie's voice was small. Are you scared? Yes, baby. Me too. Rosie slipped her hand into Clara's. But it's okay. We can be scared together. Clara squeezed her daughter's hand and walked toward the church. Reverend Mills was a small man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He led Clara into a back room while Josiah waited outside with the children, and he asked her the questions she'd expected. Mrs. Hollister, do you understand what you're agreeing to? Yes. And you're entering this marriage of your own free will? No one is forcing you? No one is forcing me. May I ask why? You've known Mr. Callahan for less than a day. Clara looked at her hands, clasped tight in her lap. Because my children need protection. Because there's a man coming who wants to take them from me. Because Mr. Callahan offered to stand between them and that man, and I believe he means it. That's not a traditional reason for marriage. No, but it's an honest one. Reverend Mills studied her for a long moment. Do you think you could love him? Someday? The question caught Clara off guard. I don't know. I hope so. But even if I don't... She stopped, searching for words. Even if I don't, I'll honor him. I'll be a good wife. He's giving my children a chance to live. That's worth more than love." The Reverend was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "I've married a lot of couples over the years. Some for love, some for convenience, some for reasons I didn't understand. You know what I've learned?" Clara shook her head. "The ones that last aren't always the ones that start with love. Sometimes they're the ones that start with respect." He stood and offered her his hand. "I'll marry you, Mrs. Hollister. And I'll pray that respect grows into something more." Clara took his hand and let him lead her back to the main room. Josiah stood near the altar, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. Rosie sat in the front pew, swinging her legs. Eli stood apart, his back against the wall, his arms crossed. "Ready?" Reverend Mills asked. Clara walked to Josiah's side. Their eyes met. "Ready," she said. The ceremony was simple. No music, no flowers, no guests except 2 children and a handful of ranch hands. Reverend Mills read from his Bible, asked the questions, received the answers. "Do you, Josiah Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Clara May Hollister, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara's voice didn't waver. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." There was a pause, an awkward silence where a kiss should have been. Josiah looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She gave the smallest nod. He leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead. Brief, chaste, but somehow more intimate than a real kiss would have been. "Mama!" Rosie bounced out of her seat. "Are you married now? Is Mr. Callahan our papa now?" "We're married," Clara confirmed. "And Mr. Callahan is—" "You can call me Joe." Josiah, Joe, said quietly. "If you want." Rosie beamed. "Joe, I like that. It's short, like me." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Joe's mouth. Eli said nothing. His face was stone. They filed the paperwork at the courthouse. Marriage certificate, signed and witnessed, official and legal. Clara watched the clerk stamp the document and felt the weight of it settle over her. Clara May Callahan. She wasn't Hollister anymore. She wasn't Daniel's wife. She was someone else now. "The adoption papers will take longer," Joe said as they left the courthouse. "Lawyers already working on them. Should be finalized in 6 to 8 weeks, assuming no complications." Complications, like Vernon. Like Vernon. They were loading into the wagon when Clara saw him. A man across the street, leaning against a hitching post, watching them. He was well dressed, too clean for this dusty town, with the look of someone who didn't belong here. Clara's blood went cold. "Joe." He followed her gaze. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved to rest on his hip, near where a gun would be. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly. "Don't run. Don't look at him again. Just get in." Clara lifted Rosie into the wagon and climbed up after her, her hands trembling. The man across the street didn't move, just watched. Joe climbed onto the bench beside her and took the reins. "Tom, you and Jake ride close. We're going home." They pulled away from the courthouse at a normal pace, unhurried, casual. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to look back, wanted to see if the man was following, but she kept her eyes forward. "Who was that?" she whispered. "Don't know, but he wasn't here yesterday." "Vernon's man?" "Probably." "He saw us. He saw the courthouse." "Good." Joe's voice was hard. "Let him report back. Let him tell Vernon Hollister that Clara May is married now, that she's under my protection. Let Vernon know exactly who he's dealing with." Clara looked at him, This stranger she'd married, this man with his scarred face and cold eyes. "You're not afraid of him?" "I ain't afraid of any man who hides behind lawyers and hired guns." Joe's jaw tightened. "Vernon Hollister wants a fight? He can have one. But he's gonna lose." They rode out of town faster than they'd come in. Clara held Rosie close and watched the road behind them. But no one followed. The man by the hitching post stayed where he was, watching them disappear into the distance. When the ranch came into view, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Home, she thought, and then caught herself. Not home, just safety. For now. Ruth met them on the porch, Tommy in her arms. "Well, is it done?" "It's done," Joe said. "She's my wife." Ruth looked at Clara with something that might have been sympathy. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Callahan." Clara climbed down from the wagon and reached for Tommy. He came to her willingly, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "Mama," he mumbled against her shoulder. "Where were you?" "I had to go to town, baby, but I'm back now. I'm not going anywhere." She carried him inside, Rosie trailing behind. Eli hung back, and Clara saw him exchange words with Joe, too quiet to hear. Joe nodded once, and Eli walked past him into the house without looking at Clara. That night, dinner was quiet. They sat around Joe's table, a family that wasn't a family, strangers bound together by law and desperation. Rosie chattered to fill the silence. Tommy dozed in Clara's lap. Eli ate with his eyes on his plate, refusing to look at Joe. "You'll have the room upstairs," Joe said to Clara. "You and the children. I'll sleep down here." Clara nodded. She'd expected separate rooms, but hearing him say it made it real. "For now," Joe added, "until—" "I understand." Their eyes met across the table. Something passed between them. Not attraction, not affection, but acknowledgement. They were partners now, whether they liked it or not. After dinner, Clara put the children to bed. Tommy fell asleep immediately, still weak from the fever. Rosie followed soon after, worn out from the excitement of the day. Eli sat up in his bed, arms crossed. "I'm not tired." "I know." Clara sat on the edge of his mattress. "You're angry." "I ain't angry." "You are, and that's okay. You're allowed to be angry." Eli's jaw trembled. "He ain't my papa. He'll never be my papa." "No one's asking you to forget your papa," Clara said gently. "I'm not forgetting him either. But Mr. Callahan, Joe, he's going to protect us. He's going to keep us safe from Uncle Vernon. That matters, Eli." "Even if you don't like him." "I don't have to like him." "No, you don't. But you have to be respectful. Can you do that? For me?" Eli was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you." Clara leaned in and kissed his forehead. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Mama." She left him and made her way downstairs. Joe sat on the porch, same as the night before, a cup of coffee in his hands. "He hates me," Joe said, without turning around. "He doesn't hate you. He doesn't know you." "Same thing, ain't it?" Clara leaned against the porch rail. His father was everything to him. When Daniel died, Eli tried to take his place. 8 years old, and he thought he had to be the man of the house. I couldn't talk him out of it. So he sees me as a threat. He sees you as a replacement, and he's not ready for that. Joe was quiet for a moment. "I ain't trying to replace anyone." "I know, but he doesn't." "What do I do?" Clara looked at him, surprised by the question. He sounded almost uncertain, like he genuinely wanted to know. "Give him time," she said. "Let him come to you. Don't push." "And if he never comes? Then you'll have 2 children who love you and 1 who tolerates you. That's more than most people get." Joe turned to look at her. "You think the little ones will love me?" "Rosie already does. Tommy will follow her lead." Clara smiled slightly. "It's Eli you have to earn. And me." "You don't love me either." "No, I don't know you." "But you might. Someday." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. Clara considered her answer carefully. "I might," she said finally, "if you give me reason to." Joe nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He finished his coffee and stood. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Callahan. Tomorrow we start building whatever this is." He walked past her into the house, and Clara stayed on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She was married, her children were safe, and somewhere out there, Vernon Hollister was getting ready to make his next move. Clara wrapped her arms around herself and tried to believe they were ready for him. 3 days passed. Tommy grew stronger. He started walking again, then running, then pestering the ranch hands with questions about horses and cows. Ruth called him a miracle. Clara called him stubborn. Rosie attached herself to Joe like a shadow. She followed him to the barn, to the corrals, to the pastures. She asked endless questions and demanded to help with every chore. Joe tolerated her with a patience Clara hadn't expected, answering her questions, lifting her onto fence rails, teaching her the names of the horses. "That one's Dusty," Rosie announced at dinner one night. "And that one's Belle. And the big brown one is Thunder. But Joe says he's actually a gentle giant, and I shouldn't be scared of him." "You ain't scared of nothing," Eli muttered. "I'm scared of spiders." "Spiders ain't nothing. They have too many legs." Clara watched her children bicker and felt something ease in her chest. This was normal. This was family. Even if the man at the head of the table was still a stranger. Even if her wedding ring felt foreign on her finger. This felt almost right. Then the rider came. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the hoofbeats. Fast, urgent, coming from the direction of town. Her hands froze on the clothesline. Joe appeared beside her, his face grim. "Get inside. Take the children to the back room." "Joe, now!" Clara ran. She gathered her children and herded them into the small room off the kitchen, where Ruth kept supplies. She closed the door and held them close, her heart pounding. "Mama?" Rosie's voice was small. "What's happening?" "Shh, baby, stay quiet." Eli's hand found hers in the darkness. He didn't say anything, but his grip was tight. Clara listened. She heard voices outside, Joe's, low and steady. Another voice, younger, urgent. Tom, maybe. Words she couldn't quite make out. Then footsteps, the front door opening. Joe's voice, closer now. "Clara, you can come out." She opened the door slowly. Joe stood in the main room, his expression carved from stone. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Ryder just came from town. Man was asking about you at the general store. Showed a photograph. Asked if anyone had seen a woman with 3 children. Clara's blood turned to ice. "Vernon's here," she whispered. "Not Vernon. Someone who works for him. But he's close." Joe's jaw tightened. "I sent Tom to fetch my lawyer, Henry Whitfield. He'll meet us here tonight. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever Vernon throws at us." Joe moved closer, his voice dropping. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, you stay calm. Don't let him see you scared. Men like Vernon, they feed on fear. Don't give him that." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. And if he takes the children? If he has papers? If he has a judge? He won't. Joe's voice was certain. You're my wife now. They're my children. He's got no claim. You don't know Vernon. No, but I know men like Vernon, and I know how to fight them. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this man she'd married, this stranger with his scarred face and hard eyes, could protect her children from the monster who was coming. But fear coiled in her stomach like a snake, and she couldn't make it go away. That night, Henry Whitfield arrived. He was 50-ish, sharp-eyed, with a manner that said he'd seen every kind of trouble and wasn't impressed by any of it. He spread papers across Joe's dining table and walked Clara through what to expect. Vernon will petition for emergency custody, Henry said. He'll claim you're unfit, that you kidnapped the children, that the marriage is fraudulent. He'll throw everything he has at you and hope something sticks. Will it work? Not if we're prepared. Henry tapped a document. The marriage is legal. The adoption is in process. We have witnesses who can testify to your character and the children's welfare. As long as everything's in order, he doesn't have grounds. But he has money. He has connections. He has money in Montana. He has connections in Montana. This is Wyoming territory. Different judges, different laws. Henry's expression sharpened. And Josiah Callahan has been building goodwill in this territory for 20 years. Vernon Hollister is an outsider here. That matters. Clara looked at Joe. He sat at the end of the table, his face unreadable. What do we do? She asked. We wait, Henry said. We let him make the first move. And when he does, we're ready. Clara nodded, but waiting felt like drowning, slow, suffocating, inevitable. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her room, watching the darkness beyond the glass, and wondered how close Vernon was. Wondered if he was out there right now, watching the ranch, planning his attack. A soft knock at her door. She opened it to find Joe standing in the hallway. Can't sleep either, he said. No. Ruth made coffee, if you want some. Clara followed him downstairs. They sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight, two strangers bound by paper and desperation, and drank coffee in silence. I buried my wife on the hill behind the north pasture, Joe said finally. Margaret. And the baby. Sometimes I go up there and talk to them. Tell them about the ranch, the weather, stupid things that don't matter. Clara looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you're my wife now, and I figure you should know the things that matter to me. He stared into his coffee cup. I loved her, more than I thought possible. When she died, I figured that was it. No more family, no more love. Just work, until I got too old to work, and then nothing. And now? Joe looked up, meeting her eyes. Now I got a wife who married me out of desperation and 3 children who don't know what to make of me. It ain't what I planned. But maybe... He stopped, jaw tightening. Maybe it could be something. If we give it a chance. Clara's throat ached. I want to give it a chance, but I'm scared, Joe. I'm so scared he's going to take them, and I don't know how to stop being scared. You don't stop being scared. You just keep going anyway. Joe reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I made you a promise, Clara. I said I'd protect you and those children. I meant it. Vernon Hollister is going to have to kill me to get to them. You understand? Clara stared at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers small and trembling. She turned her palm up and laced her fingers through his. I understand, she whispered. They sat like that until dawn broke, hands clasped, coffee growing cold, waiting for the storm that was coming. It came 3 days later. Vernon Hollister rode onto Joe's property at noon, flanked by 2 men in city suits and a sheriff Clara didn't recognize. Clara was in the yard with Tommy when she heard them coming. Her blood went cold. She grabbed her son and ran for the house, shouting for Ruth. "Take him upstairs. Get all the children. Don't come down until I say." "Clara, now!" Ruth didn't argue. She swept Tommy into her arms and disappeared up the stairs. Clara heard Rosie's confused voice, Eli's sharp questions, then silence. Joe appeared at her side, his jaw set like iron. "Stay behind me." "Joe!" "Behind me, Clara." Vernon dismounted first. He was older than Clara remembered, his face harder, his eyes colder. But that thin smile, that hadn't changed. It still made her skin crawl. "Clara." His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "You've led me on quite a chase." Joe stepped forward, putting himself between Clara and her brother-in-law. "You're on my property, mister. State your business." Vernon's smile widened. "My business is with my sister-in-law and my brother's children. I have a court order for their immediate return to Montana." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. Joe didn't take it. "I don't recognize Montana court orders in Wyoming territory." "Perhaps the sheriff does." Vernon nodded toward the man beside him. "Sheriff Dawson has agreed to assist in the lawful execution of this order." Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Clara noticed he wouldn't meet Joe's eyes. "Dawson?" Joe's voice was flat. "Didn't know you'd started taking orders from outsiders." "It's legal paperwork, Joe. I gotta follow the law. The law says that woman is my wife. Those children are in the process of becoming mine." "Whatever paper Vernon Hollister is waving, don't change that." "The paper says the marriage is fraudulent," Vernon cut in. "Entered into specifically to circumvent legitimate custody proceedings. A judge in Helena signed the order himself. A judge you paid." Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. She stepped up beside Joe, refusing to hide. "What did it cost you, Vernon? How much to buy a man's conscience?" Vernon's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Clara. Slander won't help your case. It ain't slander if it's true." "Enough!" Joe's voice cut through the tension. "You want to challenge the marriage? Fine. Do it through proper channels. File a petition with the Wyoming Territorial Court. But you ain't taking those children today. I have a lawful order. You have a piece of paper from a judge who ain't got jurisdiction here." Joe took a step forward, and Clara saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. "You want to test me, Hollister? Go ahead. But I promise you won't like what happens next." The 2 men in suits shifted nervously. Sheriff Dawson's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Vernon studied Joe for a long moment. Something passed between them. A silent calculation. Predator measuring predator. "Very well." Vernon's voice was ice. "We'll do this your way. I'll file in Wyoming. But understand this, Mr. Callahan. I have lawyers, resources, and the truth on my side. That woman kidnapped my brother's children. She married you to escape justice. And when I prove it in court, I'll take everything you have. You're welcome to try." Vernon smiled that thin, cold smile. "I'll see you in court, Clara. Enjoy your stolen children while you can." He mounted his horse and rode away, his men following. Sheriff Dawson lingered for a moment. "I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice, Dawson. Remember that next time." The sheriff left. Clara stood in the yard, her whole body shaking. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "He's never going to stop." "No." Joe turned to face her. "But neither are we." That night, Henry Whitfield arrived with news. Vernon had filed an emergency petition with the territorial court. The hearing was set for the following week. "He's moving fast," Henry said, spreading papers across Joe's table. "He's got a lawyer named Marcus Webb. Used to work in Cheyenne before he got disbarred for bribing witnesses. Vernon must have paid him a fortune to come out of retirement." "Can we beat him?" Clara asked. "We can, but it won't be easy." Henry looked at her directly. "They're going to question everything. Your decision to run, your reasons for marrying Joe, the speed of the marriage. They'll try to make you look desperate and manipulative. Joe, they'll paint you as either a fool or a co-conspirator. And the children." Clara's stomach dropped. "They're going to question the children?" "The judge will want to hear from them."
Especially Eli. He's old enough to have an opinion that matters.
"Eli hates Joe. If they ask him, then we need to make sure he understands what's at stake," Henry said. "Not coach him. The judge will see through that. But he needs to understand the truth about his uncle." Clara closed her eyes. "He's 8 years old. He shouldn't have to carry this." "No," Joe said quietly. "He shouldn't. But he does." The days before the hearing passed in a blur. Clara barely slept. She spent every waking moment with her children, trying to prepare them without scaring them. Tommy didn't understand. He was 2 years old. All he knew was that Mama was nervous, and Mr. Joe didn't smile anymore. Rosie understood more than she let on. "The bad man wants to take us away, doesn't he, Mama?" "He wants to try, baby, but we won't let him." "Joe won't let him either. Joe's strong." "Yes, he is." Eli said nothing. He'd overheard enough to piece together what was happening, and he'd retreated into himself, his face closed off and guarded. Clara tried to talk to him, but he just shook his head. "I know what I have to do, Mama." "What does that mean?" "It means I know." The night before the hearing, Clara found Eli on the porch, staring at the stars. She sat down beside him. "You don't have to be brave for me," she said quietly. "I'm not being brave for you." Eli's voice was flat. "I'm being brave for Rosie and Tommy. They're too little to fight. Someone has to." "That's not your job." "Papa would have done it." Clara's heart cracked. "Oh, sweetheart." "Papa protected us. That was his job. And now he's gone. So it's my job." Eli finally looked at her, and she saw the tears he was fighting to hold back. "I don't like Mr. Joe. I don't want him to be my papa. But he married you to keep us safe, and Papa would have wanted someone to keep us safe. So I'll do what I have to do." Clara pulled him into her arms, and for once he didn't resist. He buried his face against her shoulder and cried. The first time she'd seen him cry since Daniel's funeral. "I miss Papa," he sobbed. "I miss him so much." "I know, baby. I miss him too." "Why did he have to die? Why did God take him?" "I don't know. I don't know why." They held each other in the darkness, mother and son, grieving together for the man they'd lost. And when Eli finally pulled away, something had shifted in his face. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something else. Determination. "I'm going to tell the truth tomorrow," he said. "About everything. About Uncle Vernon and what he did. About why we ran. About—" He hesitated. "About Mr. Joe." "What about Mr. Joe?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "He's not Papa. He'll never be Papa. But—" His voice dropped. "He's not bad. He takes care of us. He answers Rosie's questions even when she's annoying. He carried Tommy when Tommy was too tired to walk. Eli stopped, jaw tightening. "He looks at you the way Papa used to, like you're something precious." Clara's breath caught. "Eli." "I'm going to tell the truth," Eli repeated. "And the truth is that Uncle Vernon is mean and scary, and he doesn't love us. And Mr. Joe, he swallowed hard. Mr. Joe does, even if I don't want him to. He stood up and walked inside, leaving Clara alone on the porch with tears streaming down her face. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread through town about the custody hearing, and people had come from miles around to watch. Clara felt their eyes on her as she walked up the steps with Joe at her side. "Remember," Joe murmured, "don't let them see you scared." Clara lifted her chin and walked through the doors. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Judge William Crawford sat at the bench, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a face that gave nothing away. Vernon sat at one table with his lawyer, Marcus Webb, a thin, sharp-featured man who reminded Clara of a snake. She and Joe sat at the other table with Henry. "All rise." They stood as Judge Crawford took his seat, then sat when he gestured. "We're here today on an emergency petition filed by Vernon Hollister, seeking custody of 3 minor children, Elijah, Rosemary, and Thomas Hollister. Mr. Webb, you may present your opening statement." Webb rose with an oily smile. "Your Honor, this case is about a mother who abandoned her responsibilities and a stranger who exploited her desperation. Clara Hollister fled Montana with her children in violation of ongoing custody proceedings. She wandered for weeks, exposing them to dangerous conditions, until she arrived at the ranch of Josiah Callahan, a wealthy widower with no children of his own. Within hours, Your Honor, she had convinced him to marry her and begin adoption proceedings." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Joe's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. "My client, Vernon Hollister, is these children's uncle," Webb continued. "Their father's brother, their closest living male relative. He has the means to provide for them, the family connection to care for them, and the legal standing to protect their inheritance until they come of age. He is not seeking to profit from his nephew and nieces. He is seeking to rescue them from a situation that is, at best, highly irregular, and at worst, criminal." Webb sat down. Henry rose. "Your Honor, let me be clear about what this case is really about. It's about water rights. Vernon Hollister's ranch in Montana has been failing for years because he lacks adequate water access. His brother Daniel's land, the land now held in trust for these children, has the best water rights in 3 counties. If Vernon gains guardianship of these children, he gains control of that land. That's what he wants. Not the children. The land." Vernon's face darkened, but he didn't speak. "Clara Hollister didn't flee Montana to escape justice," Henry continued. "She fled to protect her children from a man who hired investigators to kidnap them. She didn't marry Josiah Callahan out of desperation. She married him to provide her children with legal protection and a stable home. That marriage is valid. The adoption is proceeding through proper channels. And most importantly, these children are thriving in their new home." Henry returned to his seat. Judge Crawford made a note. "Mr. Webb, call your first witness." The plaintiff calls Vernon Hollister. Vernon took the stand, his face arranged in an expression of concerned sincerity. Webb led him through a carefully rehearsed story. The devoted brother, the worried uncle, the man who only wanted to help his poor, misguided sister-in-law. "I tried to support Clara after Daniel's death," Vernon said, his voice heavy with false emotion. "I offered her money, assistance, a place to live. But she became paranoid. She accused me of trying to steal from her children. And then one night, she simply disappeared." "And you've been searching for her ever since?" "I was terrified for those children. Anything could have happened to them out there." Clara's stomach churned. Every word was a lie, wrapped in just enough truth to sound believable. When it was Henry's turn to cross-examine, he didn't hesitate. "Mr. Hollister, When was the last time you visited your nephew and nieces before their mother fled? Vernon blinked. I'm not sure exactly. Was it 6 months before? A year? 2 years? I was busy with my own ranch. So you had no relationship with these children before their father died? I loved my brother, his children. A simple yes or no, Mr. Hollister. Did you have a relationship with these children? Vernon's jaw tightened. No, not a close one. And after Daniel's death, you filed for guardianship. Was that your first contact with the family? I was concerned. Yes or no? Yes. So your first attempt to be involved in these children's lives was a legal petition to take them from their mother. Vernon's mask slipped for just a moment. I was trying to help. By hiring private investigators to follow them? By paying men to take the children from their mother? That's a lie. Henry pulled a paper from his folder. I have a sworn statement from one of those investigators, Mr. Hollister. He says you offered him $200 to retrieve the boy, and I quote, by any means necessary. Would you like me to read the whole thing? Vernon's face went pale. That man is lying. Then you won't mind if I call him as a witness. Judge Crawford leaned forward. Do you have this witness available, Mr. Whitfield? I do, Your Honor. He's waiting outside. The judge's eyes narrowed as he looked at Vernon. I see. Mr. Webb, do you have any other questions for your client? Webb's smile had faded. No, Your Honor. Then let's move on. Mr. Whitfield, call your witness. The investigator, a weathered man named Jack Sullivan, took the stand and confirmed everything. Yes, Vernon had hired him. Yes, Vernon had offered extra money for retrieval. Yes, he had instructions to take the children without their mother. Why didn't you do it? Henry asked. Sullivan looked uncomfortable. Because I ain't in the business of stealing children. I found them, told Hollister where they were, and walked away. Some jobs ain't worth the money. Vernon's lawyer tried to discredit Sullivan on cross-examination, but the damage was done. Clara saw the doubt in Judge Crawford's eyes when he looked at Vernon. Mr. Whitfield, the judge said, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Callahan. Clara's heart hammered as she took the stand. Henry's questions were gentle, guiding her through the story. Daniel's death, Vernon's petition, the night she overheard the men planning to take her children, the desperate flight across 2 territories. And when you arrived at Mr. Callahan's ranch, what happened? My son was dying. Clara's voice cracked. Tommy had a fever so high I couldn't feel a heartbeat. I knocked on a stranger's door and begged him to help. And he did? Yes, he saved my son's life. And then he offered to save all of us. By marrying you. By giving us legal protection. By becoming a father to my children when they needed one. Did he force you? Coerce you? No. He explained what he could offer and what he needed in return. I made my choice freely. And do you regret that choice? Clara looked at Joe, this man she'd married out of desperation, this stranger who'd become something more. No, she said quietly. I don't. Webb's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned everything, her judgment, her choices, her fitness as a mother. You walked 3 weeks through summer heat with 3 young children. One of them nearly died. How is that responsible parenting? I was trying to protect them. By endangering them? By exposing them to conditions that almost killed your son? I did the best I could. Did you? Or did you make reckless decisions because you were too proud to admit you needed help? Clara's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. I made hard choices in impossible circumstances. I protected my children the only way I knew how. And then you married a stranger, handed your children over to a man you'd known for hours. I trusted him. Based on what? Your excellent judgment? Webb's voice dripped with sarcasm. The same judgment that had you sleeping in fields and drinking creek water? Objection. Henry's voice was sharp. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Judge Crawford looked at Webb with visible distaste. Move on, counselor. Clara stepped down feeling hollowed out, wrung dry. Joe caught her hand as she returned to her seat. You did good, he murmured. Don't let him shake you. Then it was Joe's turn. He took the stand with the same calm he brought to everything, answering Henry's questions with simple directness. Why did you marry her, Mr. Callahan? Because I saw a woman who'd walk through hell for her children, and I had the means to help. Some might say you took advantage of her desperation. Some might say a lot of things. I know what I did and why I did it. And the children? You're seeking to adopt them? I am. Why? Joe was quiet for a moment. Because they need a father, and I need a family. It ain't complicated. Webb's cross-examination tried to paint Joe as either a fool or a predator, but Joe's steady responses deflected every attack. You married a woman you'd known for less than a day. That doesn't seem foolish to you? I've made decisions in less time that turned out fine. And if the marriage doesn't work, if Mrs. Callahan decides she's gotten what she wants and leaves, then she leaves. But those children stay protected either way. You'd let her walk away? I'd let her choose her own life. That's what decent people do. Finally, the moment Clara had been dreading, Judge Crawford looked at Henry. I understand there are children involved. I'd like to speak with the oldest. Clara's heart stopped. Your Honor, it's standard procedure, Mrs. Callahan. I won't put him on the stand. We'll speak in my chambers. Just me and the boy. Clara looked at Eli, who sat in the back of the courtroom with Ruth. His face was pale, but determined. It's okay, Mama, he said. I'm ready. Eli followed the judge into chambers. The door closed behind them. Clara gripped Joe's hand so hard her knuckles went white. What if he says the wrong thing? What if Vernon's lawyer got to him? Eli's a smart boy, Joe said quietly. He knows what's true. But he doesn't like you. He told me, I know what he told you. I also know what I've seen. Joe's voice was gentle. That boy loves his family. He'll do what's right. The minutes stretched into eternity. Clara counted her heartbeats, watched the door, prayed to God and Daniel and anyone else who might be listening. Please, please let him be okay. Please let him say the right thing. The door opened. Eli walked out, his face unreadable. Judge Crawford followed, his expression giving nothing away. Let's reconvene, the judge said. Everyone returned to their seats. Clara pulled Eli onto the bench beside her. What happened? She whispered. What did you say? Eli looked up at her with eyes too old for 8 years. The truth, Mama. I told him the truth. Judge Crawford shuffled his papers, and the courtroom held its breath. I've heard testimony from both sides today, he began. I've reviewed the evidence, spoken with witnesses, and had a private conversation with the oldest child. Now I'll render my decision. Clara couldn't breathe. This case comes down to one question. What is in the best interest of these children? Not what the adults want, not what the law prefers. What is best for Elijah, Rosemary, and Thomas Hollister? He looked at Vernon. Mr. Hollister, you present yourself as a concerned uncle. But the evidence tells a different story. You had no relationship with these children before you filed for guardianship. You hired men to track them across 2 territories, and at least one witness has testified that you authorized those men to take the children by force. Vernon's face was purple with rage. Webb put a hand on his arm. Furthermore, the judge continued, Your financial interest in this case is clear. The children's inheritance includes valuable water rights that would benefit your struggling ranch. I cannot ignore the possibility, indeed the probability, that your primary motivation is financial rather than familial. He turned to Clara and Joe. Mrs. Callahan, your choices have been unorthodox. You fled instead of fighting. You married a stranger. You made decisions that, from the outside, look reckless and desperate. Clara's heart sank. But, the judge said, and she looked up, I also see a mother who is willing to do anything to protect her children. I see a woman who walked 3 weeks through dangerous conditions because she believed it was the only way to keep them safe. I see someone who, when presented with an impossible choice, chose survival. He looked at Joe. Mr. Callahan, your reputation in this territory is well known. You've built a successful ranch through hard work and integrity. You've opened your home to a woman and 3 children you barely knew, and by all accounts, you've treated them with care and respect. He picked up a piece of paper. I spoke with Elijah Hollister in my chambers. He's 8 years old and carries more weight on his shoulders than most adults I know. I asked him where he wanted to live. I asked him about his uncle. I asked him about Mr. Callahan. Clara's grip on Eli's hand tightened. He told me his uncle is scary, that his uncle yells and doesn't listen and only cares about money. He told me he didn't want a new father because his real father was dead and no one could replace him. Eli's face crumpled. Clara pulled him closer. But he also told me, the judge continued, his voice softer now, that Mr. Callahan answers his sister's questions, even the annoying ones. That Mr. Callahan carried his brother when his brother was too tired to walk. That Mr. Callahan looks at his mother like she's something precious. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Joe, who was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. When I asked Eli where he wanted to live, he said, with Mama and Mr. Joe, because Mr. Joe keeps his promises, and I think Papa would want someone who keeps promises to take care of us. The courtroom was silent. Clara's tears fell freely now. Judge Crawford set down the paper. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony heard, and the best interests of the children involved, I hereby deny Vernon Hollister's petition for custody. Elijah, Rosemary, and Thomas Hollister will remain in the care of their mother, Clara Callahan, and her husband, Josiah Callahan. The adoption proceedings currently underway shall continue without interference. He picked up his gavel. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Vernon Hollister from approaching the children or their guardians. Any attempt to contact them will result in immediate arrest. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. This hearing is concluded. Clara collapsed against Joe, sobbing with relief. His arms came around her, strong and solid, holding her together when she felt like she might shake apart. It's over, he murmured against her hair. We won. It's over. Eli pressed against her side, and Rosie appeared from somewhere, climbing onto Joe's lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. Tommy, in Ruth's arms at the back of the courtroom, started crying because everyone else was crying, and he didn't want to be left out. They were a mess. A beautiful, chaotic, tearful mess. And for the first time since Daniel died, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Across the courtroom, Vernon stood rigid with fury. His lawyer was speaking to him in low, urgent tones, but Vernon wasn't listening. He was staring at Clara with hatred so pure, it made her blood run cold. "This isn't over," he called out. "You hear me, Clara? This isn't over." Joe stood, putting himself between Vernon and his family. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Sheriff Dawson appeared at Vernon's elbow. "Mr. Hollister, I think it's time for you to leave." Vernon shook off his hand. "I'll be back. I'll appeal. You'll what?" Joe's voice was cold. "You'll waste more money on lawyers who can't win?" You'll file more petitions that get thrown out? Go ahead, Hollister. Spend every cent you have trying to take these children. It won't work. They're mine now, and I protect what's mine." Vernon's face twisted with rage. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually attack Joe right there in the courtroom. But then Webb grabbed his arm and pulled him away, murmuring urgently about appeals and strategies. Vernon left. The courtroom slowly emptied, and Clara stood in the center of it all, surrounded by her children and her husband, feeling like she'd just survived a war.
Mama?
Rosie tugged her sleeve.
Can we go home now?
Home. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Home.
Yes, baby, she said, her voice thick with tears. Let's go home.
The ride home from the courthouse felt different. The air hadn't changed, still hot, still heavy, but something inside Clara had shifted. She sat on the wagon bench, with Joe's shoulder brushing hers, Rosie asleep in her lap, and for the first time in months, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. "You're quiet," Joe said. "I'm thinking." About? About how I don't know what to do when I'm not running. Joe glanced at her. "You learn. Takes time, but you learn." "Did you? After Margaret?" He was silent for a long moment. The horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard-packed road. "Took me about 3 years to stop waking up, reaching for her side of the bed," he said finally. "Another 2 before I could walk past her sewing room without feeling like I'd been gutted."
Some days, I still catch myself starting to tell her something, and then I remember. Clara's throat tightened. "Does it get easier?"
"No, you just get stronger." He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened. "But you already know that. You've been strong since the day you knocked on my door."
"I didn't feel strong. I felt terrified."
"That's what strong is. Being terrified and doing it anyway." Rosie stirred in Clara's lap, mumbling something about horses and pirates. Clara smoothed her daughter's hair and watched the ranch appear on the horizon. Home. The word still felt strange, but it was starting to feel less like a lie. When they pulled into the yard, Tom and the other hands were waiting. They'd heard the news somehow, ranch telegraph, Ruth called it, and they gathered around the wagon with grins and congratulations. "Knew you'd win, boss," Tom said, helping Clara down. "That Vernon Hollister didn't stand a chance." "It was closer than you think," Joe replied.
"But it's done now." Ruth appeared on the porch, already wiping her hands on her apron. "I've got supper started. You all must be starving." Clara realized she hadn't eaten all day. Her stomach growled at the mention of food. "Starving," she admitted. They went inside, and the house that had felt so empty when Clara first arrived now hummed with noise and motion. Rosie woke up, demanding to show Ruth her new hair ribbon. Tommy toddled after her, determined not to be left out. Eli hung back, quiet and watchful. But when Joe asked him to help carry water from the well, he went without argument. It was such a small thing, such a normal thing. But Clara watched her son walk out the door beside her husband, and she felt something crack open in her chest. This could work. This strange, improvised family. It could actually work. Dinner was chaos in the best way. Rosie talked non-stop about the courthouse, the judge's big chair, the scary man with the oily smile. Tommy knocked over his water glass twice. Eli ate in silence, but he didn't leave the table early, and when Joe asked him to pass the bread, he did it without hesitation. After the children were in bed, Clara found Joe on the porch. She was starting to think of it as their place, the spot where they talked, where they made decisions, where they figured out this impossible thing they were building. "Eli helped you today," she said, without complaining. "He did." "That's new." Joe nodded slowly. "He's been watching me, testing me. trying to figure out if I'm going to hurt you or leave or turn into someone he can't trust. And I think he's starting to decide I might be all right. Joe's mouth quirked. Not good, mind you, just all right. Clara laughed, a real laugh, the first one in longer than she could remember. That's high praise from Eli. I'll take it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Clara thought about everything that had happened. The flight from Montana, the desperate arrival at Joe's gate, the marriage, the hearing, the moment when Eli had called Joe someone who kept promises. Joe? Yeah? Thank you. For everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I mean it more now. She turned to face him. When I married you, I was making a deal. Protection for my children in exchange for... I don't even know what I thought I was giving you. A warm body in your house? Someone to cook and clean? That ain't what I wanted. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Joe was quiet, his face half shadowed in the fading light. What I'm trying to say, Clara continued, her voice catching, is that somewhere along the way, this stopped being a deal. I don't know when. Maybe when you sat with Tommy through his fever. Maybe when you answered Rosie's 100th question about horses. Maybe when you looked at me in that courtroom like I was worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for. I didn't believe that before. I do now. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. And I want you to know, this isn't just an arrangement for me anymore. It's real. Joe stared at their joined hands. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with something she'd never seen before. Clara. His voice was rough. I ain't good with words, never have been. But I want you to understand something. What? The day you showed up at my door, I thought I was making a business deal. Sensible, practical, good for both of us. He shook his head slowly. But then I watched you fight for those children. I watched you stand up in that courtroom and refuse to break even when they were tearing you apart. I watched you love those kids so hard, it scared me. Why did it scare you? Because I remembered what it felt like to love someone that much. And I remembered what it felt like to lose them. His grip on her hand tightened. I swore I'd never feel that again. It was easier to be alone. Safer. And now? Joe lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Now I reckon safe is overrated. Clara's breath caught. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Joe. I ain't asking for anything, he said quickly. I know this started different than most marriages. I know you might not ever feel... She kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't graceful. She just leaned in and pressed her lips to his, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. For a moment, he went completely still. Then his hand came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back, gentle at first, then deeper, with a hunger that made her whole body tremble. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Well, Joe said, his voice unsteady. That's one way to shut me up. Clara laughed, tears pricking her eyes. You talk too much. First time anyone's ever accused me of that. She leaned her forehead against his. Joe Callahan, I think I might be falling in love with you. Might be? It's been a long day. Ask me again tomorrow. He laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, and pulled her into his arms. They held each other on the porch, and Clara felt something settle into place inside her. Something that had been broken for so long she'd forgotten what whole felt like. The weeks that followed were the closest thing to peace Clara had ever known. Summer began to fade into something gentler. The brutal heat eased. The grass turned from brown to gold. And the Callahan Ranch, her ranch now, she reminded herself, settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Tommy grew stronger every day. He followed the ranch hands around like a small shadow, asking endless questions about cows and horses and why the chickens made so much noise. Ruth declared him the most curious child she'd ever met, which Clara took as a compliment. Rosie bloomed. She'd always been social, but now she had room to spread out, to explore, to become fully herself. She learned the names of every horse, helped Ruth in the kitchen, and talked Joe's ear off from morning until night. Joe tolerated it all with patient good humor, answering her questions and letting her help with small chores. "Joe, why do horses have 4 legs?" "Because that's how God made them." "But why 4? Why not 6? Bugs have 6. "I reckon horses would look funny with 6 legs." "But they'd run faster." "Maybe, but then they'd need more shoes, and the blacksmith would charge me double." Rosie considered this with grave seriousness. "That's a good point." Clara watched these exchanges and felt her heart swell. This wasn't the family she'd planned. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she married Daniel all those years ago. But it was good. It was real. And it was hers. Eli was the hardest. He didn't soften overnight. He didn't suddenly start calling Joe Papa or running to him with problems. But the hostility faded, replaced by something more cautious, watchful, like a wild animal deciding whether a human could be trusted. Joe didn't push. He gave Eli space, included him when appropriate, and never tried to force a relationship that wasn't ready. But Clara noticed the small things. The way Joe asked Eli's opinion on ranch matters. The way he taught the boy to check fence lines and spot sick cattle. The way he treated him like a capable person instead of a child who needed managing. One evening, Clara found them in the barn together. She'd come looking for Eli to tell him dinner was ready, and she stopped in the doorway when she heard them talking. "You ever ride fence before?" Joe was asking. "No, sir. Papa showed me once, but—" Eli stopped. "Sorry." "What for?" "Talking about my papa." Joe was quiet for a moment. "Eli, you don't ever have to apologize for talking about your father. He was a good man. He loved you. That don't change just because I'm here now." "But there ain't no but. Your papa was your papa. I ain't trying to take his place. I'm just trying to be someone else. Someone who looks out for you, because that's what family does." Eli was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was very small. "My papa used to let me help him with the horses." "Yeah?" "He said I had good hands. Gentle. He said horses could tell when someone was kind." He was right. Joe's voice softened. "You do have good hands. I've seen the way you treat Belle. She trusts you." "She does?" "Animals know. They can feel when someone's got a good heart." Joe paused. "You want to help me with the evening rounds tomorrow? Just the 2 of us?" Clara held her breath. "Okay," Eli said finally. "I guess that would be all right." Clara backed away from the barn door, her eyes burning with tears. She didn't want them to know she'd been listening. This moment, this fragile, tentative bridge, belonged to them. That night, she told Joe what she'd overheard. "You're good with him," she said. "Better than I expected." "I like the boy. He's got spine." "He gets that from his father." "He gets it from you, too." Joe pulled her close. "That whole family's got spine. Even little Tommy, and he can barely walk straight." Clara laughed and nestled against his chest. "We're a stubborn bunch." "I noticed." "Any regrets?" About what? Marrying a stubborn woman with 3 stubborn children who turned your quiet life upside down? Joe pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Not a single one. The adoption was finalized on the Thursday. Henry brought the papers to the ranch himself, spreading them across the dining table, while Clara and Joe and all 3 children gathered around. "It's official," Henry said. "Elijah, Rosemary, and Thomas Hollister are now legally Elijah, Rosemary, and Thomas Callahan."
Josiah is their father, in the eyes of the law. Rosie bounced up and down. "Does that mean Joe's our real papa now?" "It means," Henry started. "Yes," Joe said quietly. "It means I'm your papa now, if you want me to be." Rosie didn't hesitate. She threw herself at Joe, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I want you to be. I've wanted you to be forever." Tommy, not understanding but wanting to join in, toddled over and grabbed Joe's leg. "Papa!" Clara's hand flew to her mouth. It was the first time Tommy had called him that. Joe looked down at the 2-year-old, clinging to his leg, and something broke open in his face. All the walls, all the careful distance, it crumbled away, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable. "Yeah, buddy," he said, his voice thick. "Papa." Clara looked at Eli. Her oldest son stood apart, his face unreadable, his arms crossed over his chest. "Eli?" she said softly. He didn't answer. He stared at Joe for a long moment, then turned and walked out the front door. Clara started to follow, but Joe caught her arm. "Let me." "Joe, let me," he repeated. "Please." She nodded, and Joe went after her son. He found Eli sitting on the fence rail by the corral, watching the horses move in the late afternoon light. Joe climbed up beside him, not too close, leaving room for the boy to move away if he wanted. Eli didn't move. "You don't have to call me anything you don't want to," Joe said. "The papers don't change that." "I know. I ain't trying to replace your father." "I know that too." "Then what's wrong?" Eli was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm forgetting him." Joe went still. "What?" "My papa. I'm forgetting what he looked like, what his voice sounded like." Eli's face crumpled. "I try to remember, and it's all blurry, like looking through dirty water. And I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and he'll be gone completely, and I won't even remember that I forgot." Joe felt something twist in his chest. He remembered this feeling, the terror of losing someone, not just to death, but to memory. The desperate clinging to details that slipped away no matter how hard you tried to hold on. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Eli nodded. "I had a wife once, Margaret. She died 8 years ago, having our baby. The baby died too." Eli looked at him, eyes wide. "For a long time, I remembered everything about her. The way she laughed, the way she sang while she cooked, the way she'd scrunch up her nose when she was thinking hard about something." Joe's voice roughened. "But then the years passed, and the details started to fade. I couldn't remember exactly what her laugh sounded like. I couldn't remember if her eyes were blue-gray or gray-blue. Little things. But they felt like losing her all over again." "What did you do?" "I panicked. I thought I was betraying her by forgetting." Joe looked out at the horses. "Then one day, I realized something. I might not remember every detail of her face, but I remember how she made me feel. I remember that she was kind and funny and stronger than anyone I ever knew. I remember that loving her made me a better man." He turned to face Eli. "You might forget what your papa's voice sounded like. You might forget the exact color of his eyes. But you won't forget who he was. You won't forget that he loved you, that he taught you things, that he wanted you to have a good life. That's the stuff that stays.
The stuff that matters. Eli's chin trembled. You promise? I promise. The boy was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, he leaned against Joe's side. Joe put an arm around his shoulders, and they sat there together, watching the horses, not speaking. After a while, Eli said, I don't know if I can call you Papa. Not yet. That's okay. Maybe someday, but not yet.
Whenever you're ready. Or never, if that's what you want. Either way, I ain't going anywhere. Eli nodded. Then, so quiet Joe almost missed it.
Joe?
Yeah?
Thank you. For marrying my mama. For keeping us safe.
Joe's throat tightened. You're welcome, son.
They climbed down from the fence and walked back to the house together. Clara was waiting on the porch, her face anxious. When she saw them side by side, something in her expression shifted from worry to hope. Everything okay? She asked. Eli looked up at Joe, then at his mother. Yeah, he said. Everything's okay. He went inside, and Joe climbed the porch steps to stand beside Clara. What happened? She whispered. We talked. About his papa. About forgetting. About what it means to remember someone you love. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Joe. He's gonna be all right, Clara. He's a good kid. He just needs time.
How did you know what to say? Joe looked at her, this woman who'd appeared at his door with a dying child and a desperate prayer, who'd married him out of necessity and somehow became the center of his world. Because I've been where he is, he said simply. And someone has to tell him it gets better. Clara threw her arms around him and held on tight. Joe held her back, and over her shoulder he saw 3 faces watching from the window. Rosie grinning, Tommy waving, Eli almost smiling. His family. He'd thought that word died with Margaret. He'd thought family was something that happened to other people, something he'd lost his chance at when he buried his wife on the hill behind the north pasture. But here it was, messy and complicated and nothing like what he'd planned, but real, and his. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Clara found Joe sitting at the dining table, staring at the adoption papers.
What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking about the first time you called this place home. Clara sat down across from him. When was that? The day we came back from the hearing. Rosie asked if we could go home, and you said yes without even thinking about it. I remember. That was the moment I knew. Joe looked up at her. That was the moment I knew this was going to be real. Not just an arrangement. Not just a deal. Real. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was real for me too. I just didn't know how to say it. And now? Now I know exactly how to say it. She squeezed his fingers. I love you, Joe Callahan. Not because you saved us, not because you gave us a home, because you're a good man who treats my children like they matter, because you make me laugh, because you held my hand in that courtroom when I thought I was going to fall apart, because you're you. Joe stood up, circled the table, and pulled her to her feet. He cupped her face in his hands, looking at her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. Clara Callahan, he said. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone again. He kissed her, slow and deep, and Clara melted into him. This man who'd offered her a deal, this stranger who'd become her husband, this person who'd somehow, impossibly, become the love of her life. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. We should go to bed, Clara whispered. We should. Together. Joe went still. Since the wedding, they'd slept in separate rooms, him downstairs, her upstairs with the children. It was practical, sensible,
what they'd agreed to. "You sure?" he asked.
"I'm sure." Clara smiled up at him. "I'm tired of sleeping alone. I'm tired of pretending this is just an arrangement. I want to be your wife, Joe. Really your wife. In every way."
Joe's eyes darkened with something that made Clara's pulse race. "Then come on, Mrs. Callahan," he said, his voice rough. "Let me take you home." He led her up the stairs, to the bedroom that had been his and Margaret's, that had stood empty for 8 years. And when he closed the door behind them, Clara felt the last wall between them crumble. This was real. This was forever. This was home. Outside, the summer wind blew warm across the prairie. The stars wheeled overhead. And somewhere in Montana, Vernon Hollister was plotting his next move. But Clara didn't know that yet. Tonight, there was only this: her husband's arms around her, her children safe and sleeping, and the promise of a future she'd never dared to hope for. Tomorrow could wait. The trouble came 3 weeks later, when Clara had almost let herself believe it was truly over. She was in the kitchen with Ruth, canning tomatoes from the garden, when Tom burst through the door without knocking. "Mrs. Callahan, you need to come outside." Something in his voice made Clara's blood run cold. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him onto the porch. Joe stood in the yard, facing a man on horseback. Not Vernon, someone younger, harder, with the look of a person who'd done things he wasn't proud of. "What's going on?" Clara asked. Joe didn't turn around. "Go back inside." "Joe?" "Inside, Clara. Now." She didn't move. The man on the horse looked at her with flat, empty eyes. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "my name is Samuel Briggs. I've been hired by Vernon Hollister to deliver a message." "Vernon lost," Clara said. "The court ruled against him. He has no claim." "The court ruled." Briggs smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "But courts can be wrong. And sometimes, when the law don't give a man what he deserves, he has to take it another way." Joe's hand moved to rest on his hip. "You threatening my wife?" "I'm delivering a message, that's all." Briggs shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Hollister wants you to know that he ain't giving up. He's prepared to offer Mrs. Callahan a deal. Sign over the children's inheritance, and he'll leave you alone. Refuse, and things might get complicated. Get off my property. Think about it carefully, Mr. Callahan. That's good land, good water rights, worth a lot of money." Briggs' gaze swept over the ranch. "Worth more than a few brats who ain't even yours by blood." Joe moved so fast, Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, he had Briggs by the collar, hauling him off his horse and slamming him into the dirt. "Those children are mine," Joe said, his voice deadly quiet. "By law and by love. And if Vernon Hollister thinks he can threaten my family and walk away clean, he's about to learn different." Briggs scrambled backward, his face pale. "I'm just the messenger." Then delivered this message. Joe hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward his horse. "Tell Vernon Hollister that if he comes near my wife or my children, I'll kill him. Tell him that's not a threat, it's a promise." Briggs mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Clara stood on the porch, her whole body shaking. Joe walked toward her, and she saw the rage still burning in his eyes. "He's not going to stop," she whispered. "Is he?" No. Joe's jaw was tight. He's not. "What do we do?" Joe pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We protect our family, whatever it takes." That night, after the children were asleep, Joe called a meeting. Tom,
Ruth, and the other ranch hands gathered in the main room while Clara sat beside her husband, their hands clasped together. "Vernon Hollister sent a man today," Joe said. "Made threats. Demanded we sign over the children's inheritance." The room went tense. "What kind of threats?" Tom asked. "The kind that don't need to be spoken out loud." Joe's expression was grim. "I want someone watching the house at all times, day and night. No one comes onto this property without being seen."
"You think he'd actually try something?" Ruth asked. "I think he's desperate. His ranch is failing. The water rights on that land are the only thing that could save him. And desperate men do desperate things." Clara spoke up. "We need to tell Henry. Get the law involved." Briggs didn't make any specific threats, just delivered a message. The law can't do anything until Vernon actually breaks it. "So we wait?" Clara's voice rose. "We just sit here and wait for him to make a move?" "No," Joe turned to face her. "We prepare. We make sure that when he does make a move, we're ready for him." The next few days were tense. Clara kept the children close, never letting them out of her sight. Rosie noticed the change and asked endless questions. Tommy was too young to understand, but he picked up on the adult's anxiety and became clingy and fretful. Eli noticed, too. He watched the ranch hands making rounds, saw the way Joe's hand never strayed far from his gun, and put the pieces together. "It's Uncle Vernon, isn't it?" he asked Clara one evening. "He's coming." Clara wanted to lie, to protect him from the fear. But Eli was too smart for lies. "We think he might try something," she admitted. "But Joe won't let anything happen to you. I promise." "I know." Eli's voice was steady, older than his years. "Joe keeps his promises." Clara pulled him close and held on tight. 3 days later, Vernon made his move. It happened fast. Clara was in the garden with Tommy, and Rosie was playing near the barn. Eli had gone with Joe to check the north fence line. She didn't see the men until it was too late. 2 of them came out of nowhere, faces covered with bandanas, moving fast. One grabbed Rosie before she could scream. The other came for Clara. She fought. She kicked and clawed and bit. But he was bigger, stronger. He clamped a hand over her mouth and dragged her toward the horses waiting just beyond the property line. "Mama!" Rosie's scream cut through the air. "Mama!" Clara thrashed wildly, but the man's grip was iron. She saw Tommy, standing alone and confused where she'd dropped him. Saw Ruth burst out of the house. Saw the horror on her face. Then a gunshot cracked through the air. The man holding Clara stumbled. His grip loosened. She twisted free and spun around to see Tom standing on the porch, rifle raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "Let them go!" Tom shouted. The man holding Rosie hesitated. Then he turned and ran, still carrying the struggling girl. Clara screamed and tried to follow, but the man Tom had shot grabbed her ankle, pulling her down. "You ain't going nowhere," he snarled. Clara kicked him in the face. He released her with a cry of pain, and she scrambled to her feet and ran. She could see Rosie ahead, see the man carrying her toward the horses. She pushed herself harder, faster, her lungs burning. She wasn't going to make it. He was too far ahead. She was going to lose her daughter. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the north. Joe appeared over the ridge, riding like the devil himself was chasing him. Eli clung to the saddle behind him, his face white with terror. Joe didn't slow down. He drove his horse straight at the man carrying Rosie, cutting him off. The man tried to dodge, but Joe was faster. He leaned out of the saddle and grabbed Rosie, tearing her from the kidnapper's arms. The man went for his gun. Joe was faster. One shot, and the man crumpled. Clara reached them, gasping for breath. Joe handed Rosie down to her, and Clara crushed her daughter against her chest. "Mama," Rosie sobbed. "Mama, I was so scared." "I know, baby, I know. You're safe now.
You're safe." Joe dismounted, helping Eli down. The boy was shaking, but he ran to Clara and threw his arms around her waist.
"Are you okay? Is Tommy okay? I heard the gunshots and I thought—" "We're okay." Clara gathered all her children close, holding them like she'd never let go. "We're all okay." Joe stood over the man he'd shot, his face carved from stone. "Where's Vernon?" The man coughed, blood on his lips. "Go to hell." "He's on the property somewhere. He wouldn't send men without being close enough to watch." Joe grabbed the man by his collar. "Where?" "I ain't telling you nothing." Ruth appeared, Tommy in her arms. "Joe, there's a rider heading toward the main road, moving fast." Vernon, running like the coward he was. Joe looked at Clara. "Stay here. Keep the children inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me." "Joe—" "I have to end this, Clara, once and for all." She wanted to beg him to stay, to let Vernon go, to choose safety over justice. But she looked at her children, Rosie still sobbing, Eli pale and shaking, Tommy confused and frightened. And she knew Joe was right. This had to end. "Be careful," she whispered. Joe kissed her, hard and fast. "I love you." Then he was on his horse and gone, riding after the man who'd tried to destroy them. Clara gathered her children and went inside. She locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and sat with them in the main room while Ruth kept watch at the window. The minutes stretched into hours. Rosie fell asleep in Clara's lap, exhausted from fear and tears. Tommy dozed against Eli's shoulder, but Eli stayed awake, his eyes fixed on the door. "He's coming back," Eli said quietly. "Joe's coming back." "I know. He promised he'd protect us. He keeps his promises." Clara pulled her son closer. "Yes, he does." The sun was setting when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Clara's heart seized. She rose, moving the children to the back room, her hands shaking. "Stay here," she told Eli. "Don't come out until I say." "Mama!" "Promise me." Eli's face was pale but determined. "I promise." Clara went to the door. Ruth stood beside her, a rifle in her hands. The hoofbeats stopped. Footsteps on the porch. A knock. "Clara, it's me." Joe's voice. Clara nearly collapsed with relief. She threw open the door and found her husband standing there, dusty and exhausted, but alive. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over." "Vernon?" "In custody. The sheriff was already looking for him. Turns out trying to kidnap children in broad daylight gets people's attention." Joe stepped inside and pulled Clara into his arms. "He's going to prison. For a long time." Clara buried her face against his chest and let the tears come. All the fear, all the tension, all the desperate hope. It poured out of her in great, heaving sobs. "It's okay," Joe murmured against her hair. "We're safe. All of us. It's finally over." The children emerged from the back room. Rosie ran to Joe and wrapped herself around his leg. Tommy toddled after her, grabbing his other leg. Even Eli came forward, stopping a few feet away, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You came back," Eli said. "I told you I would." "I know, I just—" Eli's voice cracked. "I was scared." Joe released Clara and knelt down to Eli's level. "I know you were. I was scared too. But being scared don't mean we stop fighting for the people we love." Eli stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Joe's neck. "Thank you," he whispered. "Papa." The word hung in the air. Clara's breath caught. Joe went completely still. "Say that again," he said, his voice rough. Eli pulled back, his face wet with tears, but his eyes clear. "Thank you, Papa, for keeping us safe,
for keeping your promise." Joe gathered all three children into his arms and held them close. Clara watched through her own tears as her husband, her partner, her love, her family, embraced the children he'd chosen to call his own. This was what family looked like. Not blood, but choice. Not obligation, but love. This was everything. The weeks that followed were quiet. Vernon's trial was quick. The evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Crawford showed no mercy. Vernon Hollister was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. His ranch was seized to pay his debts, and whatever remained would be held in trust for Daniel's children until they came of age. It was over. Really, truly over. Life on the Callahan Ranch settled into a new rhythm. The fear faded, replaced by the ordinary routines of family life. Clara woke each morning to the sound of children's laughter and went to sleep each night in her husband's arms. She planted a garden, learned to can vegetables, helped Ruth with the cooking. She became part of the community, attending church on Sundays, visiting neighbors, building friendships she'd never had time for when she was running. The children flourished. Tommy grew into a rambunctious 3-year-old who followed Joe everywhere and called him Papa with easy confidence. Rosie remained her bright, curious self, but with a new sense of security that made her even more willing to explore and question and learn. She told everyone she met that her papa had saved her from bad men, and that he was the bravest person in the whole world. And Eli transformed. The angry, guarded boy who'd refused to accept Joe slowly became a confident young man who worked alongside his father on the ranch, who helped with the horses and the cattle, who laughed at dinner and told stories about his day. He still talked about Daniel sometimes, and Joe always listened, never dismissing or minimizing the boy's memories of his birth father. "Your papa would be proud of you," Joe told him one evening. They were sitting on the fence rail, watching the horses. Their place, Clara had started calling it. "The way you look out for your brother and sister, the way you work hard, he'd be proud." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he'd be okay with this? With you being my papa too?" "I think any father who loved his children as much as yours did would want someone to take care of them when he couldn't. I think he'd be grateful." "I hope so." Eli leaned against Joe's shoulder. "I don't want him to think I forgot him." "You didn't forget him. You just made room for more. There's nothing wrong with that." Eli nodded slowly. "Papa Joe?" It was what he'd started calling Joe, a compromise between the past and the present. Joe loved it. "Yeah?" "I'm glad Mama married you. I didn't think I would be, but I am." Joe's arm tightened around the boy's shoulders. "I'm glad too, son. More than you know." On a cool autumn evening, 3 months after Vernon's arrest, Clara found a letter on the kitchen table. She didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope. "What's this?" she asked Joe. "Open it." She did. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in formal legal language. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. "This is—" her voice caught. "Joe, this is the deed to the ranch." "Both our names on it now. You're not just my wife, Clara. You're my partner. In everything." Clara stared at the document, tears blurring her vision. "You didn't have to do this." "Yeah, I did." Joe came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "When I married you, I told you I wanted someone to leave this place too. Someone to carry on what I built. But that ain't the whole truth anymore." "What's the whole truth?" "The truth is, I don't just want someone to leave this to. I want someone to build it with." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You and me, Clara. Together. For as long as we've got." Clara turned in his arms and looked up at this man, this stranger who'd become her husband, her partner, her home. She thought about the terrified woman who'd knocked on his door all those months ago, the desperate bargain she'd made, the impossible choice she'd faced. She hadn't known then that she was choosing this: love, family, a future she'd never dared to dream of. She'd thought she was just surviving. But survival had become something more, something beautiful. "I love you, Joe Callahan," she said. "I love you too, Clara Callahan." He smiled, a real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look years younger. "Now, what do you say we go tell the kids they're going to inherit a ranch?" "I say that sounds perfect." They walked out onto the porch together, where Eli was teaching Rosie to whittle, and Tommy was chasing a barn cat with single-minded determination. Ruth sat in a rocking chair, laughing at the chaos. "Kids," Joe called, "come here. Your mother and I have something to tell you." They gathered around, curious, expectant, this family that had been built from broken pieces and desperate prayers. Clara looked at each of them in turn. Eli, her serious oldest, finally at peace. Rosie, bright and brave and boundless. Tommy, growing stronger every day. Joe, the man who'd given them everything. "This ranch," Clara said, "belongs to all of us now. Not just your papa. All of us. Together." Rosie's eyes went wide. "We own a ranch?" "We own a ranch," Joe confirmed. "Does that mean I can have my own horse?" "We'll talk about it." "Can I name the cows?" "Rosie, you can't name 2,000 cows." "I can try." Eli was quiet, but his eyes were bright. "This is really ours? Forever?" "Forever," Joe said. "No one can take it from you. No one can take any of you from each other. This is your home, and it always will be." Clara watched her children absorb this truth, the security they'd never had, the permanence they'd never dared to hope for. And she felt something settle into place inside her. Something that had been broken for so long, she'd forgotten what whole felt like. Home, family, love. She'd walked 3 weeks through hell to find them. She'd married a stranger, fought a monster, and built a life from nothing. And it was worth every step, every tear, every moment of terror. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Clara stood at the window of her bedroom, her and Joe's bedroom, and watched the stars appear one by one. Joe came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the first night I spent in this house. I lay in bed and cried because I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into." "And now?" Clara turned in his arms and smiled. "Now I know exactly what I got into. The best decision I ever made." "Even when I snore?" "You don't snore." "I definitely snore." "Maybe a little." She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. "But I've learned to live with it." Joe laughed and pulled her closer. "Clara Callahan, you are the stubbornest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. And I thank God every day that you knocked on my door." "Even when I brought 3 wild children with me?" "Especially then." His expression softened. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. A family, a purpose, a reason to keep going." "You gave me the same thing." They held each other in the quiet darkness, and Clara felt the last of her fear finally fade away. Vernon was in prison. Her children were safe. Her husband loved her. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned. Not the life she'd imagined when she married Daniel all those years ago. But it was good. It was real. It was hers. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of laughter from downstairs. She dressed quickly and went to investigate, finding her children gathered around the kitchen table while Joe attempted to flip pancakes. "Papa's making breakfast," Rosie announced. "He's not very good at it." "I'm plenty good at it," Joe said, scraping a burnt pancake off the griddle. "This one's just extra crispy." "It's black." "Extra, extra crispy," Eli snorted. "I think even the barn cats wouldn't eat that one." "Don't you have chores to do?" "Not until after breakfast," Eli grinned, "which might be a while at this rate." Clara leaned against the doorframe, watching her family. This moment, chaotic, imperfect, full of burnt pancakes and sibling teasing, this was everything she'd fought for. Joe caught her eye and smiled. "You going to help, or just stand there laughing at me?" "I'm thinking about it." "Think faster. I'm running out of batter." Clara pushed off the doorframe and crossed to stand beside her husband. She took the spatula from his hand and bumped him with her hip. "Go sit down. I'll finish." "I had it under control." "You absolutely did not." Joe laughed and pressed a kiss to her cheek before joining the children at the table. Clara flipped the pancakes with practiced ease, listening to her family talk and tease and laugh together. When breakfast was ready, she carried the platter to the table and sat down in her usual spot, between Joe and Tommy, across from Eli and Rosie. They joined hands for grace, and Joe spoke the words he said every morning. "Thank you, Lord, for this food. Thank you for this family. And thank you for bringing us together when we needed each other most. Amen." "Amen," the children echoed. Clara squeezed Joe's hand and looked around the table at the faces she loved. This strange, beautiful family they'd built from nothing. She thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, terrified, alone. She thought about the 3 weeks of walking, the dying child in her arms, the impossible choice at a stranger's gate. She thought about Joe's words that first night. "Marry me, and your children become mine." She hadn't known then that she was gaining more than protection. She was gaining love. She was gaining a partner. She was gaining a life. And now, sitting at this table, surrounded by her family, Clara knew with absolute certainty that every step of that terrible journey had been worth it. Because it had led her here, to this house, to this man, to this life. Home. The sun rose over the Callahan Ranch, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere, cattle lowed and horses nickered, and the world turned on, oblivious to the small miracle happening at a kitchen table. A mother who'd lost everything had found it again. A father who'd given up on family had been given a second chance. 3 children who'd lost their home had found another one. And love, real love, the kind that survives fire and fear and impossible odds, had won. Clara looked at Joe across the breakfast table, at this man who'd changed everything. He looked back, his eyes full of the same wonder she felt. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," she smiled. "I'm just happy." "Good." Joe lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "That's all I ever wanted." And it was true. It was enough. It was everything. Clara May Callahan, widow, mother, fighter, survivor, had finally found her place in the world. Not through luck or chance, but through courage and choice and the stubborn refusal to give up. She'd walked through fire and come out the other side. She'd knocked on a stranger's door and found her destiny. She'd married for protection and found love. And now, surrounded by her family, holding her husband's hand, Watching her children laugh and grow and thrive, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was where she belonged.
This was who she was meant to be. This was the life she was always meant to live. Not because fate had handed it to her, but because she'd fought for it with every breath in her body. Clara Callahan was home, and she was never leaving again.